The lake was 11 feet deep, shallow, unremarkable, 1,300 acres of brown water near New Iberia, Louisiana. Fishing boats, an island with a garden on it, oil pumps nodding along the shore. On November 20th, 1980, it swallowed an oil rig. The whole rig, derrick and all. Then it took the barges, 11 of them. Then a tug. Then it started pulling in part of the island, trees and greenhouses and ground. By the end of the day, the lake had drained itself, emptied, gone. 11 feet of water does not swallow a steel drilling platform, and a lake does not pour itself down a hole in its own floor, unless something opened a drain that was never supposed to be there. The hole that did all of this was 14 inches wide. To understand how 14 inches drains a lake, you have to know what was stacked on top of what. On the surface, Lake Peigneur was nothing special. 1,300 acres of flat fresh water in the Louisiana lowlands. Fishermen worked it in small boats. Oil pumps dotted the shoreline, ordinary here, part of the scenery. Near one edge sat Jefferson Island, and on it a botanical garden, live oaks and greenhouses, a place people paid to walk through on a Sunday. You could have flown over it 1,000 times and seen a pleasant, forgettable lake. What you could not see was underneath. Since 1919, a salt mine had been running below that water. Diamond crystal. Not a cave, a mine. Hollowed out on purpose. Level after level, going down as far as 1,500 feet. The tunnels were enormous. Roughly 100 feet by 80 each one. Big enough to drive through, room after room after room, carved out of solid salt. The miners didn't take all of it. They left thick columns of salt standing in place, pillars, spaced through the tunnels to hold the ceilings up. The whole mine stayed open because those pillars of salt refused to move. So picture the full stack. 11 feet of lake on top, the lake bed under that, and beneath the bed, a cathedral of empty rooms held up by salt, going down a quarter-mile into the earth. Two operations sharing one address. One crew drilling down from the surface, hunting oil, another crew far below, cutting salt. And neither one knew exactly where the other was working. The morning of November 20th, the drilling crew hit a snag. Their 14-inch bit stuck fast at 1,228 feet. Not alarming. At that depth, on a job like this, a stuck bit is routine, and working it loose is usually easy. So they worked it, and it didn't come loose. Hold on to the clock here. From the moment that bit jammed to the moment the platform started to tilt, 2.5 hours passed. 2.5 hours where the men on top were fighting a stuck drill, annoyed, checking equipment, and nothing above the water looked wrong. Everything wrong was already happening underneath them. The bit hadn't just stuck. It had punched through the roof of an empty upper level of the salt mine. A 14-inch hole the size of a dinner plate opened in the floor of the lake, straight into the hollow rooms below, and lake water started pouring through it. Fresh water and salt have a relationship. Salt dissolves in it. The water going down that hole hit the walls, the floor, and the pillars, the columns of salt holding up every ceiling in the mine, and it began eating them. So the hole did not stay the size of a dinner plate. The rushing water widened it, dissolving and tearing at the salt edges, and the wider it got, the more water came through. And the more water came through, the faster the salt disappeared. The pillars thinned. Ceilings began to come down. The drain grew on its own, faster every minute. You cannot plug a hole like that. Think about what you'd plug it with. The rock around it is salt, and salt is the one thing dissolving. Every surface you'd grab to seal the leak is melting in the water that's causing the leak. It's a wound that widens itself. And the bandage is made of the same thing bleeding out. Up on the platform, the men were still trying to free their drill. Then they heard the pops, a series of them loud coming up from below. And the platform, the whole $5 million rig, tilted toward the water. The crew of 7 understood in that instant that something had gone very wrong, without knowing what. They cut the barges loose, scrambled off the platform, and got to shore, about 300 yards back. Then they turned around and watched. The derrick leaned, went over, and the entire drilling platform slid into the lake and vanished, into 11 feet of water. They stood on the bank and watched a structure taller than a building disappear into a lake they could have waded across. and the lake was just getting started. Where the hole had been, the surface began to turn. A whirlpool opened, and it did not stay small. It widened until it was a quarter of a mile across, a slow brown vortex grinding in the middle of the lake, and it reached for everything floating on the water. The barges went first, 11 of them, dragged to the center and pulled down one after another. Then the tug, then a loading dock. Then it started on the land itself, taking trees, taking chunks of Jefferson Island, pulling the greenhouses and the garden soil down into the spinning water. A fisherman named out in a small boat felt his boat being pulled toward the center. He turned for the bank and rowed against a lake that wanted to swallow him, and reached shore with seconds to spare. He said afterward it looked like the end of the world. And here's the part that doesn't fit the picture of a drain. The hole wasn't only pulling down. All that water flooding into the mine was shoving the air out ahead of it, forcing it back up through the ground, and in places it blew upward in tall spouts of water and spray. The lake was emptying into the earth and breathing back out at the same time. It didn't take long to empty. 1,300 acres of lake, gone down a hole, and then the lake bed itself lay open to the sky, a wet crater where a lake had been that morning. Which left one problem the landscape solved on its own. Lake Penure drained to the Gulf of Mexico through a channel called the Del Cambra Canal. Normally the water ran one way, south, out of the lake toward the sea. Ordinary drainage, flowing downhill the way water does. With the lake gone, the ground where the lake had been was now lower than the canal, lower than the Gulf. So the water reversed. The canal turned around and ran backward. Salt water from the Gulf of Mexico came rushing inland, up a channel that had drained outward for as long as anyone had measured it, pouring toward the crater. Where it dropped into the empty basin, it formed a waterfall 150 feet high, the largest waterfall in the history of the state, and it had existed for about an hour. The ocean was flowing uphill to fill a hole in Louisiana. And that reversal buried the answer to the one question everyone would ask. Whose fault was this? The main piece of evidence, the drilling rig itself, the equipment that could show exactly where the bit went in and how far off the mark it was at the bottom of the flooded mine, under a new lake, unreachable. So the accounts never fully agreed. The head of the state's geological survey said the cause might have been an error in where the rig was positioned. Texaco said it had notified the owners of the salt dome about the drilling, and that they had not been told mining was going on right there. Both stories are still standing. The thing that could have settled it went down with the water. Everything so far we've watched from above. The rig, the whirlpool, the men on the bank. Now go down. 400 meters below that lake, in the dark, in the salt tunnels, there were around 50 men working when the water came in. They were inside the container the lake was draining into. One of them noticed it first. Water, moving across the tunnel floor, somewhere it had no reason to be, and no one could say where it was coming from. In a salt mine, that is the worst sentence anyone can say out loud, because everything holding the roof over your head is made of the thing water destroys. Fuel drums started to shift and float in the rising current. Then they ran. They cut power on the lower levels and moved up through the mine, level by level, toward the single elevator that could lift them out. Behind them and below them, the lake was coming down into the tunnels, dissolving the pillars as it rose, bringing ceilings down in the dark they just left. Every one of them got out. And understand why. Because it isn't what you'd guess. They didn't outswim the water or outsmart it. They lived because of how much salt had been carved out of that mine over 60 years. The rooms were so vast, so many millions of cubic feet of emptiness, that the entire lake pouring in still took time to fill them. The water rose slower than the men could climb. 50 lives came down to a race between men on a ladder and salt dissolving into water. The men were faster. Barely. Here is what stays with me. That 14-inch hole, the dinner plate that ate a lake and a rig and part of an island. On the mine side, it started as almost nothing. A little muddy water creeping across a floor. A leak. The same opening was a planetary-scale catastrophe from above and a puddle from below. One hole, a quarter-mile whirlpool on one side of it, and on the other, 50 men wading through a stream that would kill them if it caught them. Reports differ on the exact count down there. 50, some say more. What none of them dispute is the number who didn't come out. Zero. It emptied in hours. It took 2 more days to settle. The canal kept pouring the Gulf backward into the crater until the levels equalized. And as the pressure came back into balance, the lake did something almost gentle after all that violence. 9 of the 11 barges it had swallowed rose back up, one by one, and floated on the surface like corks, as if the whole thing were being politely returned. The rig didn't come back, the tug didn't come back, and the lake that came back was not the lake that had been there. 11 feet of fresh water was gone for good. In its place sat a saltwater lake around 200 feet deep, filled from the Gulf, with different water, a different depth, and different life moving into it. The shallow pond where people had fished on a Sunday was now the deepest lake in the state, and salt, which is the thread running under all of this. Your sense of scale lies to you. A small hole does not mean a small disaster. 14 inches doesn't sound like the end of anything, until you remember what's on the other side of it, and that water does not care how big the opening is, only that there is one. The mine never reopened. The companies paid out tens of millions. And the argument over whose measurement was wrong never fully closed, because the evidence is still down there. Lake Penieur is still there too. You can visit it. There are tours. From the shore, it looks calm and ordinary, a pleasant body of water in the Louisiana lowlands, the kind you'd drive past without a second look, which is exactly what it looked like on the morning of November 20th, 1980. Everyone who worked that day walked home. The only lives the lake took were 3 dogs tied up near the water that no one could reach in time. Beneath doesn't stop at the surface. Subscribe, and we'll show you the next ordinary place that was hiding a door.